My guest today is author, Ayurveda practitioner, and yoga teacher, Durga Leela. And we are talking about her new book, The Yoga of Recovery, Integrating Yoga and Ayurveda with Modern Recovery Tools for Addiction. Welcome, Durga.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me here today.
So great to have you on the show. In your book, you offer a comprehensive approach to recovery and maintaining recovery from addiction through the principles and practices of yoga and Ayurvedic medicine. Can you tell me what motivated you to write the book?
Yeah, of course, my own personal life history, which I think is really where a lot of holistic healers come from. You come through that somewhat of a battlefield of life, and you encounter these issues, and these issues are somewhat the awakening points in our life. So for my personal story, I was raised in a home where I witnessed my own mother have alcoholism, and sometimes I'll struggle how to say that because there was 5 children in my family and we don't all agree on the fact that she had alcoholism, which is the denial piece of the disease, and that, you know, the weird and strange way that addiction and alcoholism kind of spreads in to be known as the family disease, because it warps the thinking, it warps the emotional responses. So anyway, in my what I witnessed for myself, and then what I became myself was, of course, I became the alcoholic, and it was the thing that I most detested. And my mother died, and I will say of alcoholism, again, although my family don't agree. And then I did a geographic and I moved from London to Lake Tahoe. And I really just kind of wanted a different life. And why did I want a different life? Because everything that I had done was to obey the Western idea of success, you know, get a degree, get a job, you know, try to be successful, which, you know, I kind of managed that, but it was kind of hollow and flat for me. So when she died, I couldn't go on with it anymore. And I'd say the way I explain that is because everything that I did was supposed to make her better. You know, that's a codependent thinking.
Yeah.
And so it didn't. And so I just kind of bailed on my own life that I'd built, moved to America. And then 9 months to the day after moving to America, I showed up in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and have been treading the path of sobriety ever since then. And I'm grateful. I am, what do you call it? I'm revealing my own membership in that program, and I have found them to be most helpful. And in saying that, one of the things that I encountered upon moving from Britain, which has a social medicine service, to the USA, which does not, was that it was a problem that was difficult to approach for me to approach the medical model of the allopathic system, because I mean, I didn't really know how to explain the problem that I was having. Anyway, I would say that I was kind of struck sober when I did go to the 12-step program. And then I needed to kind of relearn how to live my life without all the crutches that saved me from feeling whatever it was I was feeling. And so those were like alcohol and drugs and cigarettes, particularly with this underlying issue of codependency, which had me feeling on top of the world sometimes, and then in the pits of depression at other times. And how do you medicate away codependency? Like, how do you medicate away in what is these days called the ACE problems, you know, the adverse childhood experiences? And I always like to bring that ACE acronym out to also say adverse community experiences and adverse climate experiences, because I think that's what we're all living through. And so therefore, you know, is life to be medicated away? So that's really where the work comes from, because I had to stabilize myself in like wellness rather than let the little family of behaviors that were part of my character kind of lead me to a life of like half-baked misery, you know, in recovery, especially. So a lot of us do put one thing down and then pick up another. And I definitely found that. So I had to come to this wholly rounded way of healing. And for me, that was the holistic pathways. And it was such a gift to be introduced to Ayurveda, because I had already been a yoga practitioner that was in my life back in London. And I'd gone back to, you know, the physical practice on the mat, the hatha yoga practice early in recovery. And it was very helpful for me. And then I was introduced to the sister science, Ayurveda, and that really gave me what I needed. So the book that you have is based on the course that I teach, which we call Between the Mat and the Meeting, because I did have a practice on the mat, and I did have a meeting with the therapist, and, you know, a recovery pathway meeting, whatever yours might be. It doesn't matter if it's not 12 steps, but we tend to have those two things available to us. And then for me, it was like, what do I do with the 22 hours in between? Like those daytime hours and the nighttime hours, because the state of my system, you know, my mind and my emotions and the state of my metabolism, it was tough to get through the hours of the day and night without making, you know, choices that I knew wouldn't support my health or wellness or sobriety, but being unable to not stop, you know, not do it. Like if I wasn't going to drink, then I had to do these other things, and they didn't make me feel well, but I still did them. So I needed to find a way out of that. And that's what that was the gift of having the science of life to support my recovery pathway.
Yeah, the book is really helpful, and I'm just holding it up here. I think it's chock full of you know, stories about recovery, you know, students who've participated, your own stories, and also really helpful practices. And, you know, it's so thorough. And what you're covering here, and what you're pointing to, is that how important taking care of the mind and body is in recovery. And before we get further into that, you brought up so many important points. And one is just, you know, this idea of like, what is, you know, when we're in denial about alcoholism, let's say, for example, how do you determine what is alcoholism when we live in a society where it's the social norm? And I'll just give one example because it strikes me. I remember when I was young, I would think, you know, they would always say, if you drink every day, you're an alcoholic. So that was kind of the standard. Then I was in my general practitioner's office, and it said women can have 1 drink a day every day, and men can have 2 drinks a day every day. So it has changed here in the US. So, you know, just how do we even begin to think about where, you know, as you said, in your own family, mom didn't have some don't think that mom had a problem. Some you do. Where do we draw that line?
Yeah, and that is truly a question that a lot of people ask me. And it's yoga of recovery doesn't just deal with alcohol, drugs. It deals with the whole what we call the spread addiction. And so as we go into the work that we do and the way we frame it, especially from the deep wisdom of the Vedas, which is less interested in defining the disease and more interested in getting us to know our layered, multidimensional self and its potential, which to me is much more hopeful and much more empowering. So part of yoga of recovery, what we do is we ask people, what's your definition of addiction? Because like you in interviews, I'll often be asked, you know, by the interviewer, what is addiction? And I'm not sure I always have a good answer for that, because it looks different in many different people. And we have this idea, firstly, one of the most difficult ideas we have about addiction is they're addicted and we're okay, the them and us. And that, like, you know, no healing, no true healing can really come from that level of separation. And that's true of our communities. Like it's almost like the addict, and that's old terminology now, because we should now say the person with substance use disorder, as we try to clean up our language, you know, those addicts that were needed to get clean, that we're trying to change all that language. But anyway, they seem to bear like the brunt of a lot of what you're pointing out is social norms. And that they enter into that cycle of social norm, which is materialism, consumerism, you know, kind of egotistic individual living. And then we kind of let them take the brunt of it, bear the burden of it, and tell them they need to get well. And yet it is a family system disease, and that has been recognized for many years. So when I'm teaching this, you know, a way to summarize it is we have the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA, speaking of addiction as a chronic relapse and brain disease because drugs change the brain, and they're developing treatment medications for people to be in treatment, stay in treatment, and prevent relapse. And relapse is, you know, triggers, and their triggers kind of, let's say, they describe life. So life is a trigger for relapse. And then, you know, we let people sit with that and let them feel their feelings around it, because there's been feelings for many years as to whether there is a complete spiritual solution or whether pharmaceutical solutions should be part of a long-term or short-term recovery pathway. And then I then offer ones that I prefer, like I recognize. So Deepak Chopra says, when more is never enough. And I really love that, because that seems to be the way we interact with the corporates. Like they give us something, and when we get it, it begets another thing. Like, you know, as soon as you get an iPhone, you need all the little accessories for, like, not just any cell phone. So we are being raised and conditioned into that lifestyle. And then one of the biggest ones we really, it's like 3 words that we use in yoga recovery, and it comes directly from Gabor Mate and his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And he says there is one addiction process, and that's the one that makes most sense, because we don't need to be looking at the substance. You know, when the Dalai Lama speaks about addiction, he talks about desire, craving, addiction. And he ran a beautiful conference on it several years ago with his Mind Life Society in Dharamsala. And he had all the neuroscientists present, you know, about the dopamine and the brain chemicals. And he would just keep asking every one of them, is that the cause? And that's what yoga and Ayurveda say. Well, like when I trained in it, when I was being trained in Ayurveda, they said, don't treat the symptoms, treat the cause. And so that is a little bit of what I've built the yoga of recovery work around. And one of my shift moments, and I'd say there was 2 of them, and that's how I based the conversation in the book. That firstly, I heard about constitution, and if you want, we can come back to that. You know, that each person is a unique individual, and they manifest energy and chemical imbalances in different ways. So even although we may say that they have alcoholism or they have arthritis, they'll both feel them. The felt sensation of living with that disease is different for each person, even in different stages of life, it's different. But the other thing was the cause of disease. And so when I heard, and it was Dr. Mark Halpern of the California College of Ayurveda at the Shivananda Ashram in Grass Valley, California. And he talked about the cause of disease. And he said, one, the yoga and Ayurveda system do see the disease at this spiritual level, this forgetfulness of our spirit true nature. But that cascades down into how we, like, what would you call it, deeply imprint into the dis-ease, which is we will misuse our senses. And then we will have what I love this terminology, we have crimes against wisdom. So we will act against our own will in a way, like our reason says not to do this, but we act against our own wisdom system. And then the other one, the effects of time and environment. So as we repeat this, the disease like deepens within us. And so therefore it takes longer to like reverse out and bring us back to a more easeful living. So actually I spend quite a bit of time in our live sessions just looking at all the different perspectives on addiction, because what is it? Like we want to welcome people in, definitely before it becomes this in desperate need of acute care or you'll die. Like we can see people kind of having addictive types of behaviors across the board. And it would be nice to bring in the treatment or the conversation earlier than we do, like all the way down to preventative as well. And, you know, Gabor Mate in that phrase, One Addiction Process, he talks about the shopaholics, the workaholics, the internetaholics, you know, the drug and alcohol users, even food. Like there's a whole spectrum of substances and behaviors that we turn to. So in the addiction field, there was this phrase, what's your drug of choice? So in yoga recovery, we just say, what's your distraction of choice?
There you go.
Because that's where most of us are.
Right, right. Very helpful. So one of the important aspects that you bring forward in the book, and I think is the premise of the book, is how Ayurvedic practices bring balance to mind and body. And you say we've become over-identified with our senses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Over-identified with our senses, yes. And it is important to understand that from the aspect that Ayurveda views the misuse of the senses as a disease-causing pathway. And we live in what I call a hyper-speed, hypersensory society. And so the senses have a natural outward seeking direction. And so we do look out into our world to see what can bring us a range of felt sensations, you know, in our relationship with what we eat and what we smell and what we see. So they can be stimulating, they can be sedating, all those things to our senses. But the senses can only take us so far. The yogis actually say they're like blunt instruments. You know, they have a certain amount of power, but although we definitely identify ourselves as material beings, what is more powerful in us is the mind, the more subtle aspect of our being. So the yoga offers a lot of, like, what can I say, replenishing and nourishing aspects of practices, and even material things like sensory aspects that will nourish us to a deeper level. So the aspects of how we use the senses in a more subtle way. But the Ayurveda healing offers us 5 sense therapies. So even although like the causative factor is the curative factor as well. So the way we need to retrain our senses, and the solution that's offered through yoga, most people know, is pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses. And I'm just grateful for Ayurveda because it teaches us how to use the senses in a therapeutic, in a constructive, in a creative way, because we don't really go from 0 to 100, you know, just at the beginning. So given that a lot of the addictive habits are this, they are like coping mechanisms that we've developed in like our senses and the relation that we have with people and substances and behaviors, that we're not able to stop them all completely. So it's good to have like a palliative treatment that teaches us how to be able to be in the world using our senses, but no longer in a destructive way. So that really appealed to me, because even although yoga is of like, it's a great aspiration of mine. I'm not there yet. I live in the material world. I live in our Western society, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of sense invitations. So I'm
Mhm.
not going to live like a monk and just negate all my sense desires,
Mm.
especially in the original, like, early periods of recovery. So Robert Svoboda wrote a beautiful article many years ago about sweetness, and he talks about flooding the sense gates with sweetness.
Mhm.
And in the work of yoga of recovery, which is not covered in the first book that I've written, but it is work called Healing the Habits That Bind.
Mm.
And it is the 6 tenets of yoga of recovery. And one of our tenets is life is sweet.
Mm.
And so one of our like inquiries in this 6 tenets we call creative self-inquiry
Mhm.
is that we come to the healing science of Ayurveda and find ways that we can sweeten our life and flood the sense gates with sweetness that is not destructive. So
Mm.
that when you're in those stress moments, when you're in those moments where you are craving something, that
Mhm.
you can have something
Mhm.
and you can have all the sweetness that you can imagine.
Mhm.
But when we say hypersensory, we say also hyper speed, and we also say there's hyper sweet. So the way we've refined sugar and the way we put, generally the phrase is we have engineered addiction into the food chain through the excess addition of sugar and salt,
Mhm.
especially in highly processed foods. So that hyper sweet, and we refer to that in yoga recovery as heroin sweet. And that's how we get our children hooked.
Yeah.
That's how you train a person into this addictiveness that we're seeing. Because if they're on the levels of sugar that they're on it from birth, basically, by the time they get to 10 and 12, they're looking for something a little bit, up from there. So
Mhm.
then enters the caffeines and the cannabis and,
Mhm.
the vaping or whatever it is. And then that just keeps ramping up. So there's words that we use in yoga like rajas, which
Mhm.
is the externalization of my sense of self. So the ego in this externalized sense is that my better self is out there,
Mhm.
in the world and also in the future.
Mhm.
And that's this unsteady place to be at a level of self-identification.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then also we have this, the Rahu effect, which comes from the Jyotish, the science of light.
Mhm.
And Rahu is the amplification. And our society amplifies, the sensory life.
Mhm.
That's what's offered to us. And before they can really amplify that, they find fault with us. So
Mhm.
they have questioned our very identity. Our skin is the wrong color. Like if you're white, you need to get darker. If you're dark, you need to get whiter. We are the wrong shape. We are the wrong weight. The whole attack on the body system is, it's on the premise of some company has something to sell you to make
Yeah.
yourself more acceptable. And when you look at the addictive drives, like they're hitting right at the crux of who we are as people, which is this deep need to be loved and accepted.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so therefore we move into this, like in a hyper consumer society, we move into this just trying to purchase our way to be okay. And that can be some of the addictive pathways, especially around like the disordered eating and things, not being the right shape or size, which is a heavy
Mm.
message that we've been given. So one of the things that we do in this is, I mentioned the constitutional self that Ayurveda offers us, and I do think that's good because it allows us to recognize all the different shapes and sizes because of the different combination of the way we hold the 5 elements in
Mhm.
our body mind system. And rather than, like, yoga of recovery does not concentrate fully on what we call the doshas, the biological forces, vata, pitta, kapha.
Mhm.
We spend more time on the elements. because the elements correlate to the senses, 5 elements for us. And I know some people are like, 5 elements, isn't it 4? So our elements are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And ether is the idea of space. And so they correlate to the senses. So the senses, sense of smell relates to earth, sense of taste relates to water, sense of sight relates to fire, sense of touch relates to air, and sense of hearing, sound relates to ether. And so as we build up that, what we call our operating system, then people are able to see, okay, so the way I self-soothe, you know, the way I reach into my world through my senses, it's natural, it's normal to do so, but a lot of the things that are waiting to like meet us there are not doing what we need them to do. Like they are probably working what we would say short-term pleasure, long-term problem. So the more we condition ourselves to going back to that same place for the solution, and it no longer is the solution. So that's one of the traps that we fall into. And I think that's one of the reasons people are perplexed and confused as to what addiction is.
Yeah.
Because it can be, it doesn't matter if it's legal or illegal. It doesn't matter, you know, that it's alcohol or drugs or a Netflix binge or the doom scrolling. Like it is the entrainment of the mind in the hope to get some deeper, fulfilling response than what we're receiving. So like there's so many pitfalls in our conditioning in our consumer society.
Yes. And you talk about the 3 gunas and the sattva, rajas, and tamas, and I'm probably mispronouncing those, but and you'll correct me on that. But it's fascinating, and you go into it in such depth in the book, and I recommend that people read the book because what I want to say about the book is that it's very helpful. Even if you're not identifying as having addiction, it is just very helpful and useful. I found so much practical advice. And what I want to mention is the Ayurvedic, one of the things you say is the Ayurvedic daily routines help to develop sattva. And I'd just like you to speak a moment about that, if you don't mind, which is a calm or focused mind. It is a daily brain repair and care. And you go on to say that the 3 R's of sattva are regularity, routine, and repetition. And this may save us all.
Yeah, so yeah, the 3 gunas, it's really crucial because in this healing system of the Vedas, they're looking at us. And so as they look at us, and there's this identification with mind-body system. So there is the physical, psychological aspect of what we call the doshas, but then deeper and more causal than that, there is the psychological, spiritual aspect of the gunas. And the gunas are the aspects of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And so sattva in like a universal level is intelligence, rajas is energy, and tamas is materiality. And the 3 gunas are, you know, we have equated them with the idea of sattva gives us happiness because it's the capacity to self-regulate what the system needs, both mind, body, and, you know, at different times of life in different seasons. So it's dynamic. So it's working with energy and materiality, and it's being able to bring it to like the homeostasis, the balance, the sweet point of life. But we say that the rajas and tamas are what we call the factors of imbalance in the mind. So when rajas activates in the mind or even in the identity, we strongly identify with externals. So we are, you know, the clothes we wear, the size we are, the color of our hair, the size of our bank account, all of those. And what is to be noted with that is those are inherently unsteady. So like if we have our sense of self overly identified with these unsteady externals, then we don't have a steady sense of self, and it's too confusing, it's too irregular. And you know, living at that level of instability, then eventually we cannot find like a sense of self to be content or steady with, and the seeking externally becomes almost desperate. And then you kind of gravitate into this, what we call tamas. And tamas is the exhaustion of the mind-body system in trying to find stability, you know, any sense of satiation from the externals. And so we drop down into what we call the more inert, lethargic, almost hopeless and defeated, depressed, denial type of state. And then it's like we don't see our options anymore. So when we speak about the gunas, I think what I have in the work that we do, we have lots of ways to describe these 3 words. So firstly, I would say we jokingly call it the DSM in 3 words. And so the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. And so there is this idea of a steady sense of self. And then there is this idea of the kind of active development of that self. And even at the tamas level, what we like to see, the stuckness of us is just latent potential. Like we don't need to pathologize ourselves so much. If you look at the human in all its intelligence, which is all of us, every single one of us is kind of miraculous as a living being. And so therefore we try to draw out the attention to the potential, and the potential is not fully decided by the past. That even when there has been difficult lessons, those difficult past lessons can really motivate us into a much better lived future, and we start that today. So sattva is the present. It's the choices we make today that create the future of tomorrow. And the regularity, routine, and repetition, again, that is also a description of addiction when you think of it. So, you know, we find something, we like it, we do it over and over and over again, but it seems to give us diminishing results. So therefore we might add something else to it, you know. So therefore we're taking that same thing, and it's interesting that the journey is either healing or harming. And it's more to do with the subtle attachment, the belief system. So therefore, if we believe ourselves just to be purely material beings, then you can gather all the money, all the possessions in the world, and then you should be the happiest person. You should be at the top of the heap. But as we look around, we don't see that. We see the ones that we revere, like the models, the actors, the actresses, any of those people, and they have the things that we're all supposed to aspire to, but we don't really see them being happy. You know, they have all the things we're told that we should need and want, and yet they're sort of miserable. Not all of them, but you know, enough of them to like prove that's not really the journey that most of us really want to be on. So I think sattva also just represents the subtle, whereas rajas is let me also say it this way, when it comes to establishing ourselves in change, so all of us have this like chronic lifestyle disease. If you look at the pandemic of addictiveness, if you look at the pandemic of things like the lifestyle diseases, the metabolic disorders, the cardiac issues, the like diabesity that some people refer to, diabetes and obesity, it shows us, you know, reaching more and more for the material and the externals, and they're not really working for us. So as we change, as we bring the necessary lifestyle changes, that like one of the worst things you can do with that is feel yourself deprived. Like I can't have, and how many people do you hear say that? Oh, I can't have that anymore. I can't have this anymore. So like we really don't do well with deprivation, none of us. So the gunas really describe the healing pathways. So the tamas is that condition that we need to change. Rajas is the action we take to change. And then Sattva is the desired place that we reach. And those are not actual destinations, but they're dynamic feelings and beliefs every single day. So the more difficult it seems for us, and the more embedded that kind of lifestyle choices are, then we say it's more tamas. And for that, what we're pointing out in yoga recovery is those people need a lot of supervision. So when it comes to addiction, we often say those will be the people in the rehab, or they'll be in the maybe even jails from like a nudge from the judge in like DUI or some sort of criminal activity. And they may actually therefore receive some of the rehab facilities. And that is like supervised to the nth degree. They no longer have a choice of what they're doing. They are told to do what they're doing. And sometimes that will bring about enough of a change that they can move to the next stage, which is the rajas, which we say that person knows what they need to do, but they haven't steadied themselves in it. So they'll kind of like, if we say tamas is darkness, then we say rajas is like the light is on, the light is off. So one day we wake up and we're pretty sure of what we need to do, and we're going to go about it and we do it. And we do it with enough positivity that we can get through it. And then for, I would say, almost no reason, the next day you wake up and you just can't stand it, this deprivation, this struggle, it's all too much, and you don't have that stability and strength anymore. So we say that people in that rajas effect need a lot of support. And sometimes they'll be the people reaching out and voluntarily asking for support. So they come and sign up for your meditation series, or they sign up for your course or your yoga classes. And they will maintain something of a to and fro struggle with what they know to be their better choices. And then once we've gone through that, and the big thing for rajas is they need the support. So tamas also needs the support, but we call it, it's more strict supervision.
Right.
And then rajas is just, it needs a supportive community, like-minded people who are paying attention to their own habits and behaviors and are there to support each other through it. So any kind of therapeutic relationship, your yoga teacher, your therapist, your yoga therapist, all of those will help you. And then eventually, once you establish yourself in a more steady sense of self and become familiar with all the dynamic aspects of that, your stage of life, the seasons, the environment that you're living in, then we say that you're more established in sattva. And then sattva is what I like to say, you're able to self-initiate your own practices. So you're no longer so desperate or needing the support, but then also you've detached from one of the main causative factors of all these problems, which is the selfishness that is built into that myth of separation. And so therefore, when you act in a way that serves others too. So therefore, when it comes to recovery pathways, something that a lot of people haven't understood is like, well, if you've not drank for 10 years, why are you still going to those meetings? And it's because you take up the opportunity to serve others.
That's right.
So that ripple effect of healing, that what you have received, then you freely give. And so there's this beautiful like cycle. Now, one person can be going through those cycles in different areas of their lives. So we see someone that's doing really well in their recovery from like, let's say alcohol and drugs, but they're really cycling into struggling and stuck in their, let's say their career or their romantic relationships kind of thing. So there's all these different areas of life where you can be getting on board, like you've got a pretty good daily routine and you're eating, some healthy foods, but at the same time, you're still out there and emotionally you're unable to make good connections with people at the like deep relational, intimate levels. Right. So there's just all these different levels that we need to be you know, have, it's not like working on, but have that, like the description of that healing process, and healing meaning like coming into our fullness, coming into our wholeness. So the pathological disease is not really what the holistic aspects are working with as the long term. You know, we are working more towards that, the wholeness of the being at that unlimited potential spiritual level. And that really is a lot of the work on this, the subtle level. So it's, you always see these conversations are always being given of like the allopathic model, but we always have to bear in mind that the allopathic model is a biochemical model. Right. And the holistic model is much more than that. And so we're always trying to compare apples to pears, you know, and it's not a true and reasonable comparison that we're making. And I really want to say this to especially all the people that practice yoga, that practice meditation, that practice, you know, teaching these sciences, is that we are in the realm, like Chinese medicine, we are in the realm of the subtle life force, the prana, the chi, and that is not the operational level of the biochemical allopathic Western medical model system. And so therefore we have this, like I often just think of Einstein saying not everything that matters can be measured. And so like when we go into mental health problems, I think that's where we are really, like we are into this more subtle aspect, and we can't come at everything with a drug, the pill for every ill, you know.
Right. It's so helpful. It really is so helpful. And it's so great to speak with you. I think we have so much more to say, and I want to be mindful of your time and to thank you for writing the book. And Jack, that's my cat. He has a few things to say too, it would appear. But I really appreciate you being here and being on the show and writing the book. And it's Yoga of Recovery, and you offer online programs as well as in-person programs, and you have the book, and people can explore your website, yogaofrecovery.com, and kind of enter into this broader level of healing that we all need, but is especially helpful for people in recovery. So thank you so much, Durga.
Thank you, Laura. And if I may say, there is the book, and I hope it's something that the listeners will be able to either buy, or certainly you can borrow one from my local library. And then we have a second Saturday class. So every second Saturday of the month at 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. If you sign up, register for free on my website, you can join us for a session to see what it looks like as a conversation and a practice. So we do a little bit of the education, we do a little bit of sharing and discussion, and then we do some practice. So that's like a window into what this is and what this needs to be. And it's a lot of my work and a lot of my students' work is to make it a grassroots community conversation. Yes. And we really invite you to be part of it. And remember, it's not just alcohol and drugs, it's the whole addictiveness of our society and the kind of, just lived misery when we don't get what we're looking for from all the things that we're told that we need to have. Yeah. And so there is a way out from that. So join us, and thank you for everything that you offer in this beautiful podcast and all your work. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Durga. We'll see you again.
Thank you.